And I did take a look at the lesson briefly. I think there's definitely some stuff that we don't need to worry about. The second README is talking about remote exec, which I did already briefly cover yesterday. Basically, don't use it. You can, it's an option. And let me share so I could have some kind of point of reference while I'm talking here. It's not so much that nefarious things will happen if you do use it. It's just that even the developers of Terraform themselves say to use it as a last resort, right? So we're providing examples and you're welcome to play around with it, but we're learning Ansible so that you don't have to finagle with remote exec inside of Terraform. And sharing. And so what we will also cover today, I'll continue to demo um, some of what I've been adding onto the Ansible inventory and playbooks that I've been writing. And they're all very much in line with what you'll have to do for the assessment, right? So we'll talk about that after looking over today's lessons as well. All right, so apparently this is supposed to be about playbooks again. So we are going to look at a lot of playbooks today. Let's start with Terraform provisioners, though, just to, again, kind of reiterate that this is an option, right? So if we look at, I'm trying to think if there was an example from yesterday. Well, if we look at this code example, inside of the EC2, you could specify a provisioner, right? And you could do things like run commands or duplicate files. Here, we're using a file provisioner to grab a source file and to move it to a destination. So in our case, if you wanted to create a sort of shell script that would do some initial setup for us, we could definitely do that, right? But what is the alternative? Everything that you could do inside of a shell script to do something like installing Nginx, you can also do with Ansible. So yesterday, instead of using remote exec, we covered how to use your local machine as a sort of interim control node. Oh, and by the way, for the assessment, you can use your local machine as the control node. If you don't want to like set up for whatever reason, control node as an on an EC2, there's nothing wrong with using your local machine either. So that is something that I'm going to keep in the assessment. I don't think I haven't felt the need to remove that part. So everything that we learned yesterday definitely applies to that, right? If you want to use your local machine as the control node, you could do that either just by running your Ansible commands inside of a virtual environment, or if you've got it Dockerized and containerized, then really from anywhere inside of your local machine, right? Because if it's containerized, you can mount the directory that you run the command from to the workspace inside of the container. Okay, so a file is one way of getting a file from your local machine to the destination resource. There's also remote exec. The difference being remote exec allows you to run more than just a simple copy command. You could run essentially anything that you would inside of shell in this block. And these are just other values that you would pass into the EC2 resource. And I'm guessing this is what would be inside of the shell script that we're referencing here, right? Installing engine X using these four commands. I would think that we we don't even have to use a shell script, right? We could just have these commands inside of this inline block in the remote exec. But regardless of however you're doing it, the risky thing here is you're running you're running these commands without guardrails, right? So basically, you could do anything inside of here that you could a inside of a inside of a shell, right? So let's say somebody nefarious did get a hold of your Terraform file, and they could easily update that remote exec block to put in all sorts of code that you might not want running on your virtual machine, right? So this is why it's better to use tools like Ansible, which do give you guardrails, right? Because not only do they give you the flexibility of using all sorts of different modules, and these modules are backed by communities or even like the official developers of the tool themselves. But because you have to work with the modules, now you have the guardrails against running commands that you probably normally wouldn't want running on your uh, virtual machine anyway, right? So basically, if you're going to use the remote exec provisioner, use with caution. Okay. So going back to playbooks, because that's going to be the more relevant part of um, the assessments, because after all, if you know that your goal is to deploy an application, and we've been learning Terraform and Ansible, then you could probably infer that you'll be using Terraform to provision resources, and then you'll be using Ansible to manage those resources so they could run the application that you're working with, right? So the examples here, I think I think I remember this from the last cohort. This is actually just doing a lot of what we've done already, which is running different inventory files and um, playbooks. I think the interesting thing here is it was written to work in multiple containers. The reason I wanted to move away from this, though, is we moved Docker Compose specifically to like the last module with Kubernetes. So we haven't talked about Docker Compose at all yet. We moved Docker itself to the start of the curriculum, so you all could jump in and start using it by the end of the second week. But because we're no longer teaching or introducing um, Docker Compose this early, I really don't want to run with this anyway. This is something that we could maybe go back to later on after we do cover Docker Compose as extra learning. It also talks about React, which we removed from the curriculum too. So let's switch gears. I don't have a README ready for today, but to recap from where we left off yesterday, we did update yesterday's README. So what we did was we set up an Ansible control node on an EC2 using our local machine as an interim EC2, right? So that involved using Terraform to provision our resources. And and that means having blocks for your providers, your S3 bucket and remote state, which is not absolutely necessary for the assessment. Creating instance profiles for IAM roles and the necessary attachments. Um, Policies for those roles, and again, the attachments for those roles to the policies, VPC, Internet Gateway, Subnet. There's a limit to the VPCs, right? And there's what, three regions that we're using. So we really shouldn't have a problem with everybody having their own VPC. But I'm also not against folks sharing VPCs either. So if you want to go that route of sharing a VPC or even using the main one instead of using resource blocks, you can use data blocks like we covered last week. Okay, so in addition to blocks for the VPCs, we'll have blocks for route tables, subnets, associations, and finally, one of the more important parts of this is the security groups, right? Because this is what will maybe look different from student to student depending on like what services you're working with. The default port in a Django application would be a different default port from a Flask app, and the ports exposed for MySQL by default will be different from those exposed in PostgreSQL. So this is, yes, one of the more critical parts of the Terraform. And then finally, we've got the EC2s. This is where we will create both a target and a control node. This is our control node here. This is why this one has this user data block, unlike this. This user data block utilizes AWS Cloud Init. So if we go to the AWS provider, Terraform, and look up Cloud Init, this is what allows us, no, and this isn't the one we want. Or maybe it is. This is, I don't know where to find the documentation on user data, for example, but this is what allows us to use this user data block. And that allows us to do something very similar to what you saw inside of remote exec, right? You're just running lines of code specified straight from within the Terraform. Is this best practice? Not necessarily. And I technically don't even need this because my playbook installs Python. So I could actually just comment that out. And here we have some outputs. All of these are in the README, in yesterday's README. These are just convenience outputs that will print out the IP address of our EC2s along with SSH commands, along with an HTTP address that we could just also paste into the browser when we are ready to test for access to it. Okay. So that is the Terraform portion. From there, we run a command to provision the resources. And once the resources are up, we can call our playbooks. So I'm going to go to this playbook. I am going to comment these back in. I'm also going to comment this back out because this isn't working quite yet. And we can maybe troubleshoot that together. And the nice thing again about infrastructure as code is Once you have these things ready, you just call the command, right? I didn't have to do anything to my Terraform. If my Ansible playbooks were done, I wouldn't have to do anything further. I just called commands. So what are we doing? We're installing Python 3. We're installing um, pip, and then we are installing Ansible. This is going to create our remote on our remote node project directory, which also takes our inventory and playbooks from our local machine and it copies them onto the EC2. And we also added some outputs yesterday inside of Ansible to display the results of these logs. This playbook is this is a new playbook. Notice the word play above all these tasks. And this one is transferring our SSH key after installing the GitHub command line. And we see here we have a failure somewhere. When we got to our third playbook, we have a failure at the ensuring project directory exists. So, what is going on here? A task includes an option with an undefined variable. The error was project directory is undefined. Okay, seems simple enough. It's telling me where to look for this error. It's inside of the setup project playbook. And what else? The offending line appears to be name something inside of line 15, column 7. So let's go take a look at what that is and let's see if we could fix it. Okay, so oh right. And we did just look at this, right? Because I commented this out, commented this back in. This is a parent playbook to run the playbooks inside of it. Notice how I don't have tasks specified here or the other parts of the playbook. If we go to the individual playbooks, they all specify for themselves what hosts to run if we want to become the super user and variables. So by doing it this way, these properties are unique to the tasks inside the playbook. Okay, so setting up a project is where we had a failure. And where we ensure the project directory exists is where this failed. Okay, so I think it's trying to look for the project directory inside of, oh, but there's also no, yeah, we're not passing in an environment variable for the project underscore directory variable, right? And yesterday, when I was running all of this, I was passing in the environment variables straight from the command. I have since then moved all of that into an inventory file. So let's look at that inventory file and let's add another variable to that inventory. Okay, so it was complaining about project directory not existing. This is for, yes, this is for calculator app. Um, so at the root of my Docker Ansible, my entire project, where I have my Ansible playbook and inventory files, I've also got this calculator dash web app directory. So let's add that dash web app, save, rerun. Oh, and I know that the first two playbooks already succeeded, right? So I can, just to kind of speed things up, temporarily disable those in my playbook. I could also just pass in this exact playbook name in the command line, but in this way I don't have to change my command. Okay, cool. It got past that step. It should be copying the project now. What else does this playbook do? Okay, so we emphasized learning Python early on because that's what we use for Flask, for Django, and even for interacting with the databases, right? Because we use Scicop G3 to use Python to interact with and manipulate these databases. I know we didn't get to go too deep into Django, but and maybe that's a good thing because we would have maybe had to spend like 4 or 5 weeks on it. But let's see. Even though we're working with Flask, which is a lot simpler, a lot of the same initial setup steps are the same, right? So as a Python project, you want to set up a virtual environment, and that is the step we're on. Within that virtual environment, you will be installing requirements.txt because that's just the flow when you are working with a Python project. We've already talked about packages and package managers. We've talked about how different operating systems, different Amazon images, Ubuntu, Amazon 2023, how these different images use different operating systems, which use different package managers. Things like Yum, DNF, those are system related package managers. Pip is specifically a package manager for Python. And the way that pip works is when it creates a virtual environment, it will install all of the necessary Python modules in that virtual environment directory so it doesn't touch your global configurations at all. And so that is why we need a step where we install dependencies from our requirements.txt, and we could see that it failed. So let's see why it failed. Could not open requirements file. Okay, let's let's troubleshoot this. Somebody tell me what is the first thing I could look at to troubleshoot this?
Well, it's saying that the file doesn't exist.
Mhm.
So, and you're saying troubleshooting from within, I guess, here or on like the actual EC2 instance.
Anywhere. You drive. Tell me what to troubleshoot. Tell me where to look.
Okay. Oh, good night, for requirements file, message file, directory. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my son crying in the background.
No, no, no.
But you're using pip version this, however, there's a higher one you can upgrade. I'm not sure that would make any difference upgrading pip. Um, I guess I would go to that task wherever it's located.
Okay. This is this task is inside of our setup project playbook. Just gonna use this. Oh, I must have closed it. So setup project, and that task is setup virtual environment. Okay, what next?
And then if we go back to the error, it says, whoa, where's the error? Can you highlight it?
Okay,
Dang it,
which
there it is. I'm sorry, the no such file directory.
such file directory? Where is that?
I think that's right on the
Ah, there we go. Okay.
all dependencies from the final 16. Can you scroll down a little bit more for the top one?
You said
I'm
to,
sorry, no, on the actual YAML file.
okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay, install dependencies. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Well, your first suggestion was the EC2, I think, right? So let's go check that out. Let's see if it is on the EC2 because it verified the copied files. That task didn't fail. So we might want to see why it's not able to find that file there. So I'm going to grab this handy dandy SSH command. I'm going to go onto my EC2. Let's do an ls. Okay, so it copied the calculator web app just like we wanted. Aha.
Oh, okay.
It's nested. It's,
So
and
either you need to nest it in this command,
mhm, yeah,
or you just need to remove it. And
yeah, we could either do that. We could either nest it in the command or we can fix the well, first double check the directory to see if it's actually nested in there too, right? I don't
and
think it
was this a Git um pull that
yes,
okay, so I guess if we created that folder first and then did the Git pull, created the folder again,
it could have. Let's read through
because
the yeah, let's read
that
through.
happened with me in 12.
Yeah, that's probably what happened here, actually. So if we scroll up, we're copying, right, I see. When we copy this project directory, it's taking this project directory, right? Calculator, whatever, calculator web app, and then it's tossing it into calculator web app again. So let's remove that. And let's also just double check the rest of these now. This should still work. And this should also still work. This should work. And this should work. This should now work. So I'm going to save. I'm going to rerun. See how much left, how much of this playbook is left. Okay, once we install these dependencies, we can then try to start the Flask application. So we would be running a source command. It might fail here if it wants the full path. So that's something to anticipate. And let's see. Okay, so it's still copying the project directory. That kind of takes a while. And it's going to activate our virtual environment. And then it's going to run a Python command passing in app.py. Oh, oh, this I think definitely needs to change. I don't think opt is a subdirectory anywhere. I think this is supposed to be home EC2 user. By specifying that we want to change to this directory, we could just run our commands in the shell line from the directory that we've changed into, right? So it'll probably fail there because we don't have an opt folder, but we fixed it. It should be able to get past. Um, Next, we will be updating the Flask app to listen on all interfaces. So we specify the path to this Flask app, which is the app.py inside of the project directory. And we use a regular expression just in case there is anything else behind app in the name. And then we run with these values passed in. So noticing, yep, Flask port is specified here. Okay, it's still installing dependencies from requirements.txt. And this should be good. One thing we can check to confirm is to just look at the app.py. Oh, there is no app.py. It's called calc.py. So we need to change that. Either change the commands here, or the easier thing to do right now might just be to change this to app. Now, it's only going to change locally, not on the EC2 because it's already past that step. Okay, we expected it to fail here, so that's all right. Let's make sure everything is saved. Let's rerun. Okay, and we know this is gonna take a while, this copy part. So let's continue just reading through, anticipating any potential failures. Here we're using a shell, Ansible built-in .shell to run a more complex shell expression, right? Now we're passing in a conditional, and will this work? I don't know. I got this from ChatGPT. So we will find out if it works or not. And if it doesn't, then we'll troubleshoot it. And we are using a handler here, restart Flask app, which is going to be called from up here because once we update the app to use the proper ports, we'll want to restart it. Okay, so that restart is killing the Flask service running in the background. And why did we fail here? Line 1 of B and vbin activate, no such file directory. But it's pointing to non-zero return code. Oh, source calculator dash web app, venv, bin activate, app.py, and app.py. It can't start the app. It doesn't find it. I wonder if what I want to confirm is if it changed directory before running these. And I'm not seeing anywhere inside of this log any confirmation that it did. So I'm going to hard code this path instead of trying to rely on the change directory I could also look up this change directory argument, but this might be a little faster right now. So let's do that. Let's do that. Let's save. Okay. Has has anyone covered G Unicorn using Ansible?
I don't
I
think so.
don't think so.
G-Unicorn is the last assignment that some people may have used or
Oh,
assessment.
what was that, Jeremy?
I think some people use G-Unicorn in the last assessment.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think we covered it. I don't think we covered it at all, to be honest. Did we, like in the actual class? I think it was just like hitting to the assessment. I
Yeah, I
can't
don't think so.
remember.
Okay. I think that might be the last thing in the assessment that hasn't been covered. Because I'm gonna go over, you've already gone over roles and setting up MySQL. Um, and I'm just gonna share in a bit my in progress roles directory for PostgreSQL. But let's see if we could fi figure this out first. Now we know that, well, I made a mistake here. This is still missing project directory. So, and it's going to need a forward slash at the end. Let's see. It didn't complain about that first part of the command, so I'm thinking this worked. And I just forgot the project directory for the app.py. And I'm going to double check to make sure I did rename my file. Yep. Okay. Okay, and while we're waiting on this, is there anyone who isn't, is there anyone who is caught up on all of the assignments?
I think I'm pretty caught up.
Okay.
There's the SQL one yesterday.
Okay. Then let's look at, while we're waiting on this, let's look at the README for today again, just to see if it actually has a sensible assignment. We don't even want that. We want today's. Yikes, I think this might use. Oh, okay. So basically, you have the option of doing the lab in either Terraform or Docker. Yeah, but this is also something that this is what we've been covering these past 2 days. Oh, and this last part you probably probably isn't relevant. So yeah, today's challenge is no bueno. Okay. Looks like this is taking a lot longer, so that might be a good thing. In the meantime, if you're all caught up on all of the assignments, I would just say write a few more playbooks. Um, if you haven't already started writing playbook for like, I don't know, Twoj or whatever other app you've already worked with, Dojo Jump maybe, you could do that. You can try to figure out G Unicorn, which should be fairly straightforward. If we look at the commands for setting up G Unicorn locally, it's just installing it, updating an app method inside of the myapp.py, and then running the G Unicorn command. I kind of wish I had known. I would have tried to prepare something for this. Maybe while you're all working on challenges, I'll see if I can whip something up real fast for G Unicorn. Okay, this is still going, so maybe that's a good sign. Um, while we're waiting on that, let's just run through what the role looks like so we can cut the recording and have you all work on some playbooks just to get some more practice in before the assessment. I've got a roles directory. I've named it Postgres_setup. My subdirectories that I am using are tasks, vars, and handlers. Inside of my tasks is a main.yaml because all of these subdirectories need at least the main.yaml. And this will grab the tasks from inside of install postgres.yaml and it will run those. So let's look at those. We're installing scicop G2 because that's what we need to interact with MySQL, or sorry, PostgreSQL database with Python. So if you were using MySQL, you'd use the MySQL equivalent, which I can't remember off the top of my head. We're then installing Postgres. We specify a version through a variable, and we then run a few checks, like just ensuring that the directory is empty before we initialize the Postgres database. Oh, and this is using Geerling guy role. So if we also look at my alias file, because I'm running everything out of container, right? I added a new alias for running Galaxy install, and it's just that exact same Docker command, right? We are running Docker run. We are using the --rm flag to make the container temporary. So as soon as it finishes, the container removes itself. -v is to mount. So like I said at the start of the recording, because it's containerized, we can run this command from anywhere on our local machine, hence the PWD, and this container will mount that directory to workspace. Then we're specifying an environment variable. We want to disable Ansible host key checking just to make connecting with our SSH keys a little more reliable. And we're also mounting our SSH directory locally to the SSH directory inside of the container. We then overwrite the default entry point, which is Ansible Playbooks. So instead of running the Ansible Playbooks command when we call this container, we're running Ansible Galaxy. And then I specify which image to build the container from and the install command that we pass into Ansible Galaxy. Okay. I wonder if this is hanging now because it has started the application. So because that's just kind of lingering there, I'm gonna go back onto my EC2. Oh, I am on my EC2. I am going to, let's see, that is a mess. This list. Okay, how do I list with system control? I do not remember. Okay, list current units in memory. Jobs. I want all of the running services so I could confirm if, oh, actually, if I could just pass in the specific service and the service we're working with right now is Flask, then maybe I could just pass in Flask. But
Yeah, wouldn't that just be like the systemctl status
oh
flash
yeah, yeah, let's try that.
or something like that? I think there's a beginning part to that. I can't remember.
Okay, so systemctl status 295 units loaded. This might be a lot to look through. Is there a grep that we could use?
I think if you put the name of the actual service you want to get the status of, they just tell you that one.
I don't know
Like
the.
status and then like flags or something.
Yeah, we could.
Or you don't know that one.
Yeah, I don't know what the name of the service is. Let's see if. Oh wow, it's using default 480 by default.
Are you trying to look for the port to try to kill it or something?
Oh no, I'm just trying to see if it's actively running because the uh, playbook has been hanging at start the Flask application, which tells me that it at least did an error out. But I'm wondering if it's just going to stay there as long as Flask is running.
So you just go to the public IP of the EC2 if it's like,
I
or
don't,
no.
I wonder if that's, I don't know if that's, yeah, we could try it actually. I don't know if that's set up, but we could try it along with some ports. So HTTP. Oh, it is up. Okay. Good call on that. Yeah. So nice. Okay, so the app is up. Now that means that we probably want to tweak the playbook if we don't want it to just kind of linger at start the Flask application. So that's going to be some work I have to do. Um, Again, going back to the Postgres setup, we have the same folder structure that you've already covered on Saturday. So really, you should, with everything we've covered like these past 2 weeks, you're ready to go for the assessment. The last thing that has not been covered is G Unicorn. It's a very small part of it. I'm actually thinking, I'm actually thinking that it should be optional because if the goal is to deploy your application and have it visible, if you want to just have it served by Flask, that I'm personally okay with that. So let's cut here. I'm gonna yeah, I'll see if I could get something up for G Unicorn anyway for the end of the day that I could share on Slack. Otherwise, yeah, just keep routing any questions you all have for the assessment to me. And I guess if you have absolutely nothing to work on, then you could just call it an early night tonight. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's probably not even have a stand down, okay? I'll keep the room open. I'll be here, but yeah, just take care of what you need to take care of. Oh, I'm still recording.